My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how being left behind at an airport led to the biggest business takeover of my life. 3 weeks. That's all it took for everything to change. The people who raised me thought they'd humiliated me that morning, thought they'd proven once and for all that I didn't belong in their perfect little world. They were wrong. What they didn't realize was that by leaving me standing alone at JFK, they didn't just walk away from me. They walked straight into the trap they'd spent years setting for themselves. When they boarded that plane without me, they believed they were heading off for the European vacation of their dreams. When they returned, tanned and smiling, ready to launch their multi-million-dollar real estate project, they found me in the front row of their own event, sitting beside one of the most powerful businessmen in New York. And then it happened. In front of 200 investors, reporters, and society elites, my adoptive mother, Margaret Mitchell, took the stage and declared that I was not a real Mitchell, that I had no claim, no bloodline, no right to the family legacy. The crowd gasped. Phones were raised, cameras flashed. For a moment, I felt the same familiar sting of rejection I'd felt for most of my life. But this time was different. Because just minutes later, I stood up and calmly revealed the truth, that I was the majority owner of everything they thought they controlled: the land, the project, the business, even the very roof over their heads. All of it was mine. Their humiliation was swift and very, very public. They thought they'd erased me, that I was disposable. Instead, I erased them. But to understand how a quiet, invisible outsider like me ended up toppling a powerful family and taking their empire for herself, we need to go back to the very beginning, to the morning it all started, the day of the flight, the day they left me behind at JFK. I wasn't born a Mitchell. At 9 years old, I lost everything in a single night: my parents, my home, my sense of safety. A drunk driver ran a red light, and in a blink, my childhood ended. When the social worker told me a family had agreed to take me in, I thought it was a miracle. The Mitchells were everything my small, broken world wasn't: wealthy, well-connected, stable. I remember clinging to that hope when I first walked into their sprawling suburban house, my tiny suitcase in hand. Margaret Mitchell, my adoptive mother, greeted me with a cool smile, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. Beside her stood Emily, her biological daughter, a golden-haired, perfect little girl my age who looked at me like I'd trespassed on her kingdom. From the start, I knew I didn't quite fit. They never said it outright, not then, but there were subtle things. The way Margaret introduced me as a friend of the family, the way Emily corrected me when I called their house home. Over time, I convinced myself that if I just earned my place, they'd truly see me as one of them. So I worked harder than anyone. I buried myself in schoolwork, earning scholarships, and graduating near the top of my class. I went to Wharton on a full ride, then clawed my way up the finance world until, at 35, I became the youngest chief financial officer at one of the top investment firms in the city. My salary wasn't just good, it was life-changing, and I used it to change their lives. When Margaret was drowning under the weight of a $250,000 mortgage, I quietly paid it off and told her it was a refinancing arrangement. When Emily needed $90,000 for college tuition, I wrote the check without hesitation. When Margaret's old car broke down, I surprised her with a brand new luxury SUV. Credit card bills? I paid them. Medical emergencies? I covered them. Every time they came to me, hat in hand, I gave. No questions asked. Over the past decade, I'd poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into their lives. I never kept score. I didn't want to keep score. Family, I told myself, didn't operate on ledgers. But deep down, I think I believed love was transactional, that if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, they'd finally see me as a true Mitchell. So, when Margaret mentioned a dream of visiting Europe before she turned 65, I saw my chance. I spent 3 months planning a once-in-a-lifetime vacation, business class tickets, 5-star hotels, private tours through Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. Over $40,000 spent, and worth every penny, I thought, if it brought us closer. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful. This trip wasn't just a vacation, it was my attempt to buy the one thing I'd never been able to secure, a real place in their hearts. The morning of the flight felt like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. I'd been up since 4 a.m., running through my checklists one last time. Passports? Double-checked. Boarding passes? Printed and digital copies. Travel insurance, itineraries, even customized luggage tags with everyone's initials, all perfectly organized in the leather binder I'd spent weeks preparing. This was supposed to be our moment. For once, the Mitchells weren't gathering because of money troubles, a business issue, or a family argument. We were going on a vacation together. I'd made this happen, me. The thought filled me with a quiet pride as my Uber pulled up to JFK's Terminal 4 in the pre-dawn glow. By the time I got there, I was buzzing with excitement. I wanted everything to go smoothly, so I'd insisted on arriving first to check everyone in. As the family trickled in, one by one, the terminal filled with the scent of coffee and the low hum of departing flights. Margaret arrived first, of course, immaculate as always, her designer coat perfectly tailored, her pearls gleaming. She gave me a brief once-over and a clipped, "Good, you're here. You have everyone's documents, I assume?" No hug, no warmth, just expectation. Next came Uncle Charles, dragging an expensive-looking suitcase and wearing an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, not even bothering with a greeting. David, my cousin, arrived shortly after, his face buried in his phone. He mumbled a hello, but didn't look up. Finally, Emily swept in, late as usual, but glowing like a movie star, her blonde curls bouncing, her designer bag swinging from her arm. She air-kissed Margaret, hugged David dramatically, and finally turned to me with a look that felt off, too sweet, too practiced. "Sarah, can I talk to you for a second?" she asked, pulling me a few steps away while the check-in agent began scanning our passports. "Sure," I said, confused but eager to keep things moving. "What's wrong?" Emily bit her lip in mock distress, holding up her phone. "This is so embarrassing. Somehow, there's been a mix-up with your ticket." My heart stuttered. "What do you mean a mix-up? I booked all of them together. I triple-checked everything." I know," she said quickly, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "When I was picking our seats last week, I must have accidentally canceled yours instead of changing the meal preferences. It's so silly, right?" I blinked at her, uncomprehending. That doesn't even make sense. Who cancels a ticket by accident? "Next," the gate agent called, holding out a hand for the passports. Margaret stepped up immediately, placing hers in the agent's hand without so much as glancing at me. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone sharp and impatient. The agent scanned the other's documents, then frowned at mine. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this ticket isn't valid. The flight is completely sold out, has been for weeks. The earliest we could rebook is next Thursday." "Thursday?" My voice cracked. "That's 4 days from now." Margaret sighed dramatically, clutching her pearls. "Oh dear, that's unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" I stared at her. "I paid for this entire trip, Margaret. Surely someone can stay behind with me. Or maybe we can't all miss the flight," she cut in smoothly. "The hotels are non-refundable, the tours are booked. You understand, don't you?" I looked around, searching for support. David wouldn't meet my eyes. Uncle Charles checked his watch. Emily gave me a small, satisfied smile she probably thought I couldn't see. It hit me then, a cold, sinking realization. They weren't sorry. They weren't even surprised. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Margaret patted my shoulder as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "We'll sort it out when we get back. Try to enjoy a few days to yourself." Before I could respond, Emily leaned in for a quick, perfunctory hug. "We'll FaceTime you from Paris," she chirped brightly. And just like that, they turned and walked toward security, laughing, chatting, not a single one of them looking back. I stood frozen in the terminal as the crowd surged around me, clutching my useless boarding pass like a lifeline. By the time I slid into the back seat of my Uber, the initial shock had worn off, leaving a hollow ache in its place. My phone buzzed repeatedly, notifications lighting up the screen. It was the family WhatsApp group, Mitchell Euro Adventure, filling with selfies from the gate.
Emily blowing kisses to the camera, Margaret sipping champagne in business class, David joking about extra legroom now that there was one fewer passenger. Not a single message asking if I was okay. As I stared at their smiling faces, the truth settled over me like ice. I wasn't family. I was an ATM with a pulse, a convenient provider, nothing more. And for the first time, I began to wonder what would happen if I stopped paying.
The first 3 days after the airport were the hardest. I went through a haze of emotions: humiliation, heartbreak, anger, on repeat. My apartment felt unbearably silent, the kind of quiet that presses in on you until you can't breathe. Every ding of my phone was another photo or video from the Mitchell Euro Adventure WhatsApp group. Emily grinning under the Eiffel Tower, Margaret posing in front of the Louvre, David making a show of clinking wine glasses at some fancy Roman restaurant. Not one message asking how I was holding up, not one word of concern. By the third night, I couldn't stand staring at those photos anymore. I muted the group and shoved my phone aside. If they didn't care about me, I decided, I would stop caring about them. And so, I turned to the one thing I could control: work. At Hartwell Capital, my firm, we were juggling multiple large-scale projects, but one in particular kept pulling my attention: Mitchell Towers, the crown jewel my family had been obsessing over for nearly 2 years. It was a $60 million luxury development in the heart of the city. Margaret had been practically giddy when she first described it: high-end condos, designer retail spaces, rooftop lounges. She wanted it to cement the Mitchell name as a legacy family in real estate. I knew the project intimately because, in the early days, they'd leaned heavily on my expertise. I'd quietly helped them structure their financing, reviewed contracts, and set up certain legal safeguards. My name wasn't on anything publicly, of course. Margaret was far too careful for that, but I had copies of everything. That night, I opened my laptop and began sifting through the files. At first, it was just a way to keep my mind busy, to stop replaying the image of them walking away at JFK. But as I dug deeper, something caught my eye. The numbers didn't add up. I frowned, double-checking the spreadsheets. Certain vendor payments looked suspicious. Inconsistent amounts, strange timing. I pulled the records from 3 months earlier and started cross-referencing them. The deeper I went, the more my stomach twisted. By midnight, I had the answer, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Emily. She'd been promoted last year to managing director of the project, a move Margaret had proudly announced as a sign of keeping the business in the family. But Emily had used her position to embezzle funds, small amounts at first, then larger and bolder. By my calculations, she'd siphoned off nearly $2.5 million through fake companies and forged invoices. I sat back in shock, staring at the screen. This wasn't just a little mistake. This was catastrophic. The entire project's financing depended on those funds being intact. Without them, Mitchell Towers would collapse like a house of cards. My heart pounded, but this time, it wasn't from despair. It was from clarity. For years, they'd held power over me. They decided who belonged, who was real family, who deserved to sit at the table. But now, for the first time, I held something they desperately needed. Without me, my knowledge, my skills, my money, they weren't powerful at all. They were vulnerable, fragile, exposed. I closed my laptop slowly, a new thought forming like a spark in the darkness. Maybe being left behind at JFK wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was just the beginning. 2 days after I discovered Emily's embezzlement, I was still trying to figure out my next move. Part of me wanted to march into Margaret's office and throw the evidence on her desk, just to watch her perfect, cold composure shatter. But that would only give them the chance to twist the story, to paint me as ungrateful or vindictive. They'd been rewriting history for years. I wasn't going to hand them the pen again. No, if I moved, it had to be quiet, strategic, final. That was when Victor Harrington called. I'd met Victor briefly at a financial summit a year earlier. Even then, he'd been hard to miss, tall, sharply dressed, with the kind of charisma that filled a room. Victor wasn't just rich, he was legendary in the real estate world. His company, Harrington Global, had built an empire by swooping in and saving failing projects that others deemed lost causes. He had a reputation for 2 things:
ruthless business instincts, and never making the same mistake twice. When his name flashed on my phone, I hesitated before answering. Sarah Mitchell, his deep, even voice greeted me. I hope you don't mind me calling. I came across something that might interest you. I leaned back in my chair, wary. Of course, Mr. Harrington. What can I do for you? It's not what you can do for me, he said smoothly. It's what we can do for each other. I hear you're familiar with the Mitchell Towers project.
My heart skipped. I know a bit about it, I said carefully. Victor chuckled, as if he'd been expecting my caution. Sarah, I know you structured part of that financing. And I know your sister, Emily, has been dipping her hand into the till. About $2.5 million, give or take. I froze, gripping the phone. How do you know that? Let's just say I make it my business to know when a project is bleeding money, and Mitchell Towers is bleeding out. His tone turned matter-of-fact. The primary investor found out about the embezzlement. They're pulling their funding in 2 weeks. Your family is scrambling, but they'll never raise the $20 million they need in time. $20 million. The number hung between us like a guillotine blade. Victor continued. That's where I come in. I'm prepared to step in and acquire the project, at a steep discount, of course, but I'll need someone on the inside, someone who understands the structure better than anyone else. You want me to help you take over my family's project? I said slowly. I want to give you leverage, Victor corrected. Here's my offer. Partner with me. In return, you get 30% equity in Harrington Global. That's billions in assets, Sarah. It makes you one of the most powerful players in the city overnight. My mind raced. The deal was extraordinary, almost too good to believe. But it came with risks. There's one condition, I said finally. They can never know I was involved. Not until the launch event. I want to see their faces when they realize exactly who outplayed them. There was a pause. Then Victor laughed, low and genuine. Sarah Mitchell, he said, clearly impressed. I think we're going to get along just fine. For the first time since JFK, I felt a surge of something electric, hope, and maybe a little taste of revenge. The next week was a blur of late-night calls and secret meetings with Victor's legal team. Every document related to Mitchell Towers passed through my hands. I reviewed each line carefully, not just to ensure Victor's acquisition would be clean, but also to prepare for whatever tricks Margaret and Emily might pull at the last second. I knew my family. They thrived on loopholes and manipulation. If I was going to bring them down, there couldn't be even a hairline crack for them to slip through. One night, bleary-eyed from hours of reading, I stumbled across a section of the original investment agreement I hadn't thought about in years, subsection 38B. At first glance, it seemed like standard legal boilerplate, but as I read closer, my pulse began to race. 2 years ago, when I'd been quietly helping set up the structure for Mitchell Towers, I'd slipped in a safeguard clause, something I'd added on instinct, never imagining how important it would become. It stated, in the event that a managing partner is found guilty of fiduciary misconduct, their ownership shares shall automatically transfer to the largest individual investor in the project. I sat frozen, staring at the words as their full meaning sank in. Emily, the project's managing director, had been embezzling $2.5 million. That was clear and fully documented now. By the very terms of this agreement, the moment her misconduct became public, her 40% stake would legally transfer to the largest private investor. And that investor was me. I had personally contributed $5 million to help get Mitchell Towers off the ground. At the time, I thought I was being generous, supportive, helping my family. In reality, I had unknowingly positioned myself as their single most powerful stakeholder. I wasn't just part of the project, I was already its majority owner in waiting. I felt the ground shift beneath me. This wasn't just about Victor rescuing the project anymore. With this clause, I didn't need to rely on anyone to take control. Emily's own greed had handed me 42% ownership, automatically and irrevocably. With Victor's resources and legal team, I could quietly secure the remaining shares while my family scrambled in ignorance, thinking they still held the reins.
They wouldn't even realize they'd lost everything, not until the moment I decided to tell them. For the first time, I smiled. Not a bitter, broken smile, but the sharp, certain grin of a woman holding all the cards. They had left me behind at JFK. Now, I was ready to leave them behind. Forever.
The launch of Mitchell Towers was supposed to be the crowning moment of my family's legacy. The ballroom of the Regency Grand Hotel glittered like a jewel box that evening, its crystal chandeliers casting light across marble floors and gold-trimmed columns. 200 of the most influential developers and media figures in New York had gathered to celebrate what they believed would become the city's most exclusive luxury project. Servers in crisp uniforms floated through the crowd with trays of champagne. Reporters jostled for position near the press area, eager to capture the speeches and announcements. It was a scene of power and prestige, and my family thought they were at the center of it. Margaret stood near the stage, resplendent in a silver designer gown, greeting guests with that practiced, icy smile of hers. Emily hovered at her side, glowing with a smug confidence that made my stomach twist, as if the past 3 weeks of theft and deceit didn't exist. David and Uncle Charles mingled nearby, enjoying the perks of a project they had barely lifted a finger to build. None of them had any idea what was about to happen. Victor and I arrived fashionably late, stepping through the grand double doors just as the house lights dimmed. He was every inch the powerful mogul in his tailored black suit, radiating the kind of authority that turned heads and silenced whispers. I walked beside him, my black evening gown simple yet commanding. Tonight, I wasn't the quiet, overlooked outsider. Tonight, I was a force they couldn't ignore. Margaret's eyes locked on me instantly. Surprise flickered across her face, quickly replaced by disdain. Emily leaned toward her and hissed something I couldn't hear, her perfectly painted lips curling into a sneer. The crowd hushed as Margaret took the stage, her voice amplified through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began smoothly, "welcome to the launch of Mitchell Towers. Tonight, we celebrate not just a building, but a vision, the Mitchell family's commitment to excellence, tradition, and integrity." The word integrity almost made me laugh out loud. She gestured to Emily, who joined her at the podium. Emily's smile was wide and rehearsed. "Before we begin," Emily said sweetly, "there's something we must address. There is an individual here tonight who does not belong." I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. "Sarah Mitchell," Emily continued, her voice sharp now, "though she shares our last name, is not truly a Mitchell. She is not blood, she is not family. She is merely someone we were generous enough to take in, a charity case who seems to think she has a place at this table." Gasps rippled through the audience. A few investors shifted uncomfortably, whispering behind their hands. Margaret placed a hand over her heart in false sorrow. "It pains me to say this publicly," she said, "but tonight is about celebrating our true legacy, and we cannot allow imposters to disrupt that." 2 security guards began moving toward me. Victor stepped forward before they could take another step, his voice calm but commanding. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The room froze. Everyone knew Victor Harrington, the man who held more influence in New York real estate than anyone alive. You didn't cross him and keep your reputation intact. Margaret faltered. "Mr. Harrington, we weren't expecting you this evening." "Clearly," Victor replied coolly, "though perhaps you should have, considering that, as of this morning, Harrington Global now controls Mitchell Towers." The crowd erupted in a wave of shocked murmurs. Cameras flashed like fireworks. Emily's face drained of color. "That's impossible," she sputtered. "This is our project." Victor raised a hand for silence, then spoke with lethal precision. "Your primary investor withdrew funding 2 weeks ago after discovering a discrepancy of roughly $2.5 million. The funds were siphoned through fake vendors and forged invoices." He let the words sink in. Margaret's face turned crimson. "That is slander, a vile accusation." Victor tilted his head slightly. "Is it? Because the paper trail leads directly to one person, Emily Mitchell." Every eye in the room swiveled to Emily. "That's a lie," she shouted. I only moved a few things around to cover." The moment the words left her mouth, she realized her mistake. The crowd gasped. Phones shot into the air to record her floundering confession. Reporters practically leapt forward, sensing a scandal. Victor stepped aside, gesturing to me. Perhaps Miss Mitchell would like to clarify things. I walked forward slowly, deliberately, the echo of my heels filling the stunned silence. Margaret's glare could have cut glass. Emily's eyes were wide, frantic. "This," I said, holding up a sleek remote, "is what Emily has been hiding." With a click, the ballroom's giant display screens lit up. Line after line of financial records appeared, projected for everyone to see. Forged signatures, fake company names, massive unexplained withdrawals. Gasps rippled through the room as the scope of the fraud became undeniable. "This isn't speculation," I continued, my voice steady. "This is proof. Emily stole from this project, from every investor in this room." Margaret stumbled forward, clutching the microphone. "You have no authority here. You're nothing but a—" I cut her off with a cold smile. "Oh, but I do have authority. In fact, more than either of you." Confusion spread through the audience. "You see," I said, savoring each word. 2 years ago, I included a safeguard in the project's original structure. It states that if any managing partner is guilty of fiduciary misconduct, their shares automatically transferred to the largest individual investor. Emily's face went white. Margaret swayed like she'd been struck. "And who is that investor?" I paused, then delivered the killing blow. "Me." I pulled a signed document from my clutch and held it high. I contributed $5 million to this project. Combined with the 40% automatically transferred from Emily's stake, that gives me 71% control of Mitchell Towers, effective immediately. The room exploded. Some investors cheered, others shouted questions, reporters surged forward like a tidal wave. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing every moment. Margaret staggered toward me, her voice breaking. You can't do this. This is our legacy." "Not anymore," I said coldly. "As of this moment, you are both terminated. Your consulting contracts are void. Your access to the property is revoked. Security will escort you out." 2 uniformed guards stepped forward, not the hotel's, but Victor's private team. They flanked Margaret and Emily, waiting for my signal. Emily lunged toward me, tears streaming down her face. "You planned this! You've been plotting to destroy us!" "No," I said softly. "You destroyed yourselves the moment you decided I wasn't family. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences." Margaret tried one last desperate play. "Sarah, please, we're family. We can fix this." I shook my head. Family doesn't abandon you at an airport. Family doesn't steal from you. Family doesn't spend 15 years reminding you you'll never be enough. Consider this my final act of generosity. A restraining order will be issued tomorrow. Come near me or this property again, and you'll be arrested. The guards ushered them toward the exit as the crowd watched, riveted. Victor raised his champagne glass, his voice carrying above the chaos. To Sarah Mitchell, the woman who turned betrayal into brilliance and proved that bloodlines don't build empires, strategy does. The room erupted into applause. Investors surged forward to shake my hand, reporters shouted my name, and flashes from cameras lit up the room like a storm. For the first time in my life, all eyes were on me. Not as an afterthought, not as an outsider, but as the woman who owned everything they thought was theirs. The Mitchell legacy wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. The fallout was swift and merciless. By the next morning, the launch night spectacle was splashed across every major news outlet. Headlines blared: Mitchell Towers scandal, embezzlement exposed at luxury project launch, adopted daughter becomes majority owner, family empire crumbles. Clips of Emily's public meltdown went viral, replayed endlessly on social media. Overnight, she became the face of greed and incompetence. 2 days later, federal investigators froze her assets and raided her office. Within a week, Emily was arrested and charged with wire fraud and grand larceny. When the trial concluded months later, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison, reduced to 3 for good behavior. The woman who once strutted through gala events in designer gowns now wore a prison jumpsuit and waited in line for cafeteria food. Margaret didn't fare much better. Her so-called friends, the society women who had once clung to her at luncheons and charity galas, cut ties immediately, fearing guilt by association. The country club revoked her membership. Boards she had served on for decades asked for her resignation. The calls stopped coming. The invitations vanished. With her reputation in ruins and no income, Margaret was forced to move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. Her luxury car was repossessed. The elegant life she'd built on appearances evaporated, leaving only bitterness behind. Meanwhile, Mitchell Towers was reborn. I renamed it Harrington Plaza, a symbol of strength rising from corruption. With Victor's guidance, we restructured the project to include not just luxury condos, but also affordable housing units and minority-owned businesses. And I made one more decision. The $5 million I had originally invested, the same money my family had tried to claim as theirs, was donated to a foster care education program. Scholarships, mentorship programs, and housing support for children who had grown up like me, feeling invisible and unwanted. It was my way of giving back to kids who deserved better than I ever had. One evening, as we reviewed final numbers, Victor handed me a sealed envelope. "Your father asked me to give you this," he said softly. My breath caught. I hadn't expected to see Robert's handwriting again. Inside was a simple letter. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, it means you finally saw the truth I always knew. You were never the charity case. They were. I'm proud of you, not for what you've achieved, but for who you've become. You've always been my real daughter. Love, Dad." Tears blurred my vision, but for the first time in years, they were tears of healing, not pain. As I stood at the top floor of Harrington Plaza, looking out over the city skyline, I understood something profound. Sometimes being left behind isn't rejection, it's freedom. Margaret and Emily left me at the airport thinking I was powerless. They were wrong. I wasn't stranded. I was just getting ready to take off.